Hello and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. My name is Gabriel Ellis. I'm a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and a researcher of consciousness. In the last episode, I described, based on the work of a Stephen Wolinsky, how we live our daily lives almost constantly under the influence of a more or less strong trance. For example, we wake up, think about the upcoming day with a certain mood, often not good enough, or we feel into the stiff, tired body and spend the next 30 minutes in this mood until we really have to leave the house, or we go in lethargy to the bathroom for the morning routine. In all these simple examples, our focus is narrowed, for instance, on thoughts or the body or on moods, on feelings. And in our experience, in actions, we are largely on autopilot. So all those kind of routines we go through, even the mood that we wake up with, is very habitual in most cases. There's not much new computation there. There is the morning autopilot, there is the leaving the house autopilot, the going to work autopilot, and so on. So from this perspective of everyday trance, many of the activities, thoughts, and feelings that we have throughout the day are basically the results of long practiced trances. Wolinsky provides many more such examples, and if you're interested, check out the last episode if you have not done so, and I can really recommend his book, Trances People Live. And you'll find a link to that also in the description below. The problematic aspects of trance appear in mental disorders, starting with the quite common anxiety and depression, and even more so in severe disorders like borderline or narcissism. But that does not mean that everyday trances only occur in disorders. Quite on the contrary, and this is the contribution of Wolinsky, that he shows that those trances are a fundamental element of normal everyday consciousness, which means that there must be structures in the mind that all humans share. Now, when we find those structures and mechanisms, this knowledge about how everyday trances work has practical implications, both for self-development and also for psychotherapy, because with such a knowledge, we can hopefully, this will help us to better address the real causes of the issues that we are dealing with, both in our own development or if we have to do that professionally. The topic has also philosophical implications, especially for phenomenology. This is one discipline within philosophy which studies life as it immediately appears to us, our real experiences in normal consciousness. This is phenomenology. Unfortunately, the trance aspect of everyday life has so far been very little explored in its structure. It's not a really popular concept in psychology or in philosophy, so that I hope that my contributions will encourage other researchers and you as the audience to engage with this topic and to get familiar with this perspective. But in order to do that, I need to delve into some more theoretical depths, and I hope that you can follow me there. I will do that mostly in the next episode, where I really dive into kind of the mechanical aspects of how it actually works that we are daily in so many trances. Okay, at the very basic level, there are two ingredients that are necessary to create a trance. First, the immediate sensory impression, which means the unobstructed perception of what is there, what is present, primarily the unfiltered sensory data. And this is, I will kind of count all the sensory data that is immediately available to us, which is mostly seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, the sense of temperature, the experience of physiological nervous pain, our sense of balance, our sense of position and movement in space, and the organ senses, for example, hunger, thirst, and the urge to go to the toilet. So this is the immediately available sensory data that our organism provides to our consciousness. This is what I call what is there, what is present, what is real in that sense. And besides this, besides what is present, there is a second necessary ingredient, namely the perception of what is not immediately there. And this includes memories, expectations, hopes, wishes, worries, fears, anticipation, thoughts, concepts, mood, and of course, feelings. Now, this dichotomy has a fairly long tradition. It can be found first in the works of Immanuel Kant, who wrote many of his works in the second part of the 18th century, and more precisely in his critique of pure reason. What I casually call what is there, in quotes, he refers to as sensory impressions, which he then calls immediate perceptions. Now, there is an unfortunate English translation, which is quite common, that is called intuitions. And this is misleading because what he actually means is what is immediately perceived. And this comes out much more in the German original. Now, on the other hand, he sees that there are inner sensations, that there is a sense of imagination, and the ability to conceive, to understand. This is what I call what is not immediately there, not in a sensory way, and which Kant calls understanding, in German Verstand. Hegel, immediately after Kant, and also inspired by him, later adopted and changed these terms in his sense, but they're still relatively closely related. So immediate perceptions represents, if you go into literature, that what is present, what is actually there, and understanding for the 18th and 19th century philosophy represents what is not centrally present. By the way, with this division between those two categories of what is there and what is not there, I'm fully aware that I make drastic simplifications. For example, feelings and thoughts, of course, have also an immediate aspect. The unconscious is sending us those thoughts and feelings, and they appear very immediate and real to us, which is, by the way, also very important in the development of Hegel's philosophy. So, in the sense that we perceive them in the inner world, they are indeed real. Much of what I discuss here actually requires, to be very precise, a detailed discussion, especially of philosophies of Kant, Hegel, Husserl, which I will mention later more, Lacan, and early Buddhism. But for the purpose of this podcast, I have to simplify. And in the context of everyday trance, it is really sufficient to make this distinction, which is between the outer world and the inner world. In the outer world, we encounter objects or people, work, relationships, family, and this outer world is available to everyone around me. Basically, I can record the circumstances of the outer world with a camera, and then I can discuss with people about it. So this is something that I can immediately relate to others. So in that sense, it has a shared reality to it. We can agree upon it. We can find a consensus of what we see, what we hear, and so on. So in that sense, it is very real, and it can be shared among different observers and people. And in contrast, I have a private inner world available only to me. And this inner world is responsible for the trance. The very simple model is this, that the objective outer world is more or less correctly perceived by us. And this perception is always, and this is what I emphasize, is always overlaid by a goal and purpose-oriented interpretation, or with other words, with a distortion. So there's a real perception of the outer world, and this is then interpreted and distorted by my inner world. The trick, so to speak, is that my personal judgment, my distortion, which is not shared by my outer world, becomes a perceived reality. In other words, I do not understand that what I perceive is a mixture of objective perception and my corrupted judgment, or my interpretative judgment. I do not perceive them separately. I don't get the ingredients for a cocktail, mix them together, and then enjoy the cocktail. I always get a ready-made cocktail, and I don't get the list of ingredients inside of it. This is what I experience at every given moment. I only see the mixture and perceive this mixture as immediate truth. And that is precisely the trance effect. In a trance, I believe that I perceive reality, even though half of it, to put it simply, of this perception is a product of my inner world. Now, the ones of you who are familiar with psychology and psychological concepts, they might know a term that is quite related to it. It was introduced by Freud, and this is projection. So that I perceive an outer reality, which partly is actually coming from my inside, means that I project unconsciously, unknowingly, my inside to the outside world. And so part of what I see is actually coming from me. A simple example of projection is feelings of guilt. And there are many more examples. So let's assume I did something wrong. And then I project this feeling onto my girlfriend. And so when we talk, I constantly see signs of accusations or criticism in her remarks. If I were aware of this mechanism, that I project this on her, I could question and correct my perception. But if I naively rely on the perception of reality, in quotes, I will objectively and really hear the accusation in her voice or what she says. And I could swear, if I was asked, that I really heard it, but her voice was different. There was a sense of accusation in her tone, where in fact, this is a product of my projection, but I don't see it. This is the mixture that makes it difficult to distinguish between what is real and what I project onto the situation, onto people. Okay, so I hope that this simplest level has become clear. We always perceive a mixture of objective sensory perceptions combined with a level of judgment and interpretations which I do not recognize as such. It's always, for example, in therapy, detectives' work, so to speak, to find out what parts of my reality I have been unconsciously projecting. Now, if that were all, then it would be a fundamental problem, okay, but I should be able to manage well through my experience, through talking to people, and let go of my projections or false interpretations, and to replace them with more accurate interpretations. So then, for example, my girlfriend would ask me if everything is okay. I would tell her that I hear a certain tone in her voice. She tells me very convincingly that this is not so. And then I believe her and correct my projections. This would be basically it. But in reality, we see that many of our projections and false interpretations are very resistant in a pattern. And even though we often have the opportunity to correct ourselves, we still cling to our false interpretations. For example, we mistakenly feel attacked in a very habitual and pattern way, or we mistakenly think that, for example, when we are in a bar, that someone has an intimate interest in us, even though I'm projecting my interest on them, or we mistakenly think that we are not loved or liked, even though this is not the case, etc., etc. There are so many examples for that. So, why the persistence of the false interpretation? This persistence, this rigidity, it requires a glue, something like a mental, psychological glue, roughly speaking, which makes us more ignorant of the reality, and as a consequence, which makes us stupider than we actually are, and which blocks our access to reality. This glue is convictions and feelings. The two are in nature, in their phenomenon, they're quite different, but in fact, there are two different aspects of very much the same, of our inner world. And they are related to each other. For example, if I was raised with the conviction that I have to earn affection and love through achievement, if this was how my parents raised me and I then internalized this mindset, then this conviction includes another conviction, which is that I'm not fundamentally lovable. So if I was raised with this attitude, I would walk around making connections with people, forming relationships with the assumption that I have to earn the sense of being loved, that I have to earn to be respected, and that it's not my innate right, so to speak, as a human being. And so this will continually create fresh feelings. This conviction, which has been installed in me, which I internalized in my childhood, in this example, it doesn't always have to be childhood convictions, but this conviction will, like a fountain, produce feelings again and again that feel very real, and that I will project on to the outside world, and I will project that on people. And if I don't repeatedly check if my fundamental assumption that I'm not lovable and so on is actually true, I will simply assume that I'm not lovable, and this will create again and again those feelings of reality. I will see that, I will feel that, I will be confirmed by my experiences that, oh, I got this criticism because, of course, I'm not fundamentally lovable. I didn't get the promotion because of that. My relationship is stuck because of that, and so on and so on. It's not difficult to imagine that I can easily find confirmation for such a dysfunctional conviction inside of me. In general, the deeper or older such a belief or conviction, the more difficult it is to correct it, and the more convincing the trance that it creates gets. The more I cling to my false interpretation, the more ignorant and stupid I become because I don't allow new experiences to change my mind. I am simply ignorant of this. So the glue of trances is convictions and feelings. And here comes a specialty that comes into place in therapeutical sessions. Convictions and feelings, it includes suffering. The worse people feel, and this is also the clinical experience that I have in my therapeutic work, the more they are locked in a bubble of their inner world, which means they are in a more rigid trance. And the worse they can perceive the outer world. It's as if they're locked in their dysfunctional convictions and the fountain of feelings that this produces. And the worse I can perceive the world as a consequence, the worse I can question my fundamental assumptions because I don't let in new information that could disprove my convictions. And so this is the circle of trance that is closed now if intense suffering is there, and which makes those trances very stable. People who are particularly under the spell of their trance, whether due to acute suffering or, for example, because of personality disorders, are hardly able to let the outer world or other people in. The inner world then dominates, the inner world with its dysfunctional beliefs and the consequential emotions, and people mostly experience their projections. They don't experience the real outer world anymore. And this is why I have an allergic reaction when I hear in, self-help contexts or sometimes even in therapeutic contexts when people say that real suffering is necessary for people to change. No, mostly real suffering makes people weak, vulnerable, and being closed up in the inner world of dysfunctional projections and being stuck in a trance. This is in most cases what intense suffering does. There are a few exceptions who can really transform their suffering, maybe in moments of grace, insights and so on. But this is by far not the common case. Mostly suffering is really, really damaging to people. So ideally for therapeutic work is when people have, to quantify it, a medium amount of discomfort and suffering, because then they're still open to the conversation. They're open to reframing, to questions, to question their own belief, to see themselves from the outside. All this mental flexibility that a therapeutic context requires, they are able to do this. The stronger the suffering, the more they need immediate, very simple help in order to get to a place at all where they can do real therapy. So in this sense, it's a shame when I see that people wait too long until the suffering becomes so intense that they first have in therapy to invest, time and energy to dig themselves out of the most urgent hole, and then to start the therapy. And it's even more tragic when people think that the therapeutic work is finished once they have dug themselves out of their hole, but have not started to question their fundamental dysfunctional beliefs and the emotions that come out of that. So I hope that I could clarify kind of the position of suffering in the connection with trances that it creates here with this contribution. Okay, so I hope that I have made clear the basics of everyday trance and to make it understandable. A little preview of the next episode. I will actually go, like I said, into the mechanics of everyday trance. This has to do with Husserl's Phenomenology, where he describes how different layers of fading experiences are overlapping in every single moment. This will be crucial for us in order to understand how those trances actually work. And I will describe how we can reduce the influence of trances in our lives. And like I said before, this is baked into our minds, it's baked into our consciousness. There are always those two parts. So we cannot fully get rid of kind of the trances, but we can minimize them. By the way, this is directly related to Buddhism, and it is no coincidence that Buddha, the term Buddha, literally means the awakened one. He is the one who managed to completely overcome the trance programmed into human consciousness. If you want to take this pop culture reference, he's the one who could escape the matrix. He is the one that can only deal with reality and who is not in danger anymore to be sucked into a trance of an inner world that distorts his perceptions. So this is the fundament, this is the big aspiration of Buddhism, that it does go beyond normal humanity, beyond the normal mind, which is always this mixture of reality and trance. So more on that next time. Tune in if you're interested. Do find the last episode if you have not watched it yet. If you're interested, look up Wolinsky's book, who provides many examples and also therapeutic advices of how to get out of individual trances. You can also find a link to a free introductory therapy session with me because, of course, I apply this knowledge about trances also in my therapeutic work. And until then, I thank you for your attention and hope to see you next time.